we're going to talk about today an orientation shift that I characterize as towards a learning-oriented subjectivity. How is it that people become subjectively more learning-oriented? That's going to be kind of the theme, and I know it sounds a bit cryptic. I'm going to take a few minutes and we're going to unpack that as we go along. But the starting point for this deals with the points that you see up on the screen, or this is where I want to start with. There's a shift going on that I characterize as a shift in the world from knowers to learners. Seems real simple. I'm going to unpack that. We're going to go into some ideas about that and get some participation from you about that. That as the world shifts from knowers to learners, it shifts its emphasis from what somebody knows to their capacities. That when I was interested in producing a knower as an educational system, then what you know is what's important to me. And I look at it that way, I measure it that way, I test for it. In every respect, I'm concerned with what you know. When I'm concerned with developing a learner, if I'm an educator or a system concerned with facilitating a learner, then my concern is, how are your capacities for learning evolving? It's an entirely different thing. We're going to talk about this, what this shift means. Because once we start to get concerned with somebody's capacities for learning, then the capacity of all capacities that we start to get concerned with is how well they're participating in extending their capacities. And I make the contrast that right now, in many respects, education is like the nurses that exercise the coma patient. Right? They pick up the leg and the arm and they move it around, but there's nobody home on the other end pushing back, trying to become more alive in response to that. And that in fact, if we're going to do the kind of things that we're talking about, it requires an inversion. It requires that the idea of subject matter, of experiences, of knowledge, all of the things that education has pursued historically need to be turned inside out. And that rather than seeing knowledge and skills as the objective of education, we need to see it as the means. Rather than seeing knowledge and skills, if you will, rather than looking at the learner's capacities for learning as if they're utilities, they're just the means through which that we acquire knowledge and skills, we've got to turn the whole thing upside down and say that no, knowledge and skills are the utilities through which we extend our capacities, inside out. And that in order to do that, in order to make this inversion function, that we've got to be wanting to learn to do it. That as an education system as a whole, if our purpose isn't to learn how to facilitate the learning of individuals, if that isn't co-equal to our intention for them to be learning, if we're not designing the experiences, the classrooms, the collaborative exercises, the technology, the system, as if it's our learning environment, our opportunity to learn into how to do our work, then we're never going to get anywhere. We're going to stay in this kind of torpedo, loudspeaker, missile firing, bell curve process. This is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a shift going on in the world between knowers and learners. That's a long conversation in itself. We want to talk about that requiring or precipitating a shift once we start to concern ourselves with learners, to shift into exercising and extending and calling forth their capacities. And that as we start to call forth their capacities, that the number one capacity we want to call forth is their participation in learning. And that in order to do that, we have to go through an inversion in which we might characterize the relationship between the teacher, a group, the class as a whole, the school, the district, the state, the world, as if the relationship we're trying to evolve is a mutually learning-oriented relationship. That we're calling forth somebody as a learner, and we're doing it by learning how to do it, and that we've got to make that meet.